Okay, so in this last video, I just want to go over um, this kind of PowerPoint I made called Additional Slides of Fun. That's pretty great, huh? Let's see here. I want to do full screen here. Okay. The last video concluded with a discussion of the demand curve and how it was graphically derived from the series of indifference curves and budget constraints. If not to take this a step further, this last video, what it's going to talk about is when the price changes along the demand curve. We know we have an increase in the quantity demanded, for instance, when the price falls. I want to highlight the fact that actually two things are going on. Now, we know from the last section of this course that we said that the demand curve was downward sloping because of the law of diminishing marginal utility, and we kind of left it at that point. But there's actually two things that are going on here, and those two things that are going on are the substitution effect and the income effect. Okay, so if the price is falling, quantity demanded is increasing. We know that, so bullet 1 here would be the law of demand. Moment. But then actually what's happening are two things. First, in the case of the substitution effect, what's happening is that as the price falls, we tend to substitute towards that good because it is now cheaper relatively speaking. But then second, there's an income effect. And this deals with the fact that although my income hasn't gone up when the price has fallen, the purchasing power of my income has increased. By purchasing power, what we mean is that my income can buy a certain number of products. Well, it can buy more of those products if the price of those products has decreased. So I'm going to feel richer, even though I'm not really richer. That's going to be our income effect. So both of these are going to be happening whenever the price is changing. Okay. I don't think I need to talk about this any further. Again, substitution effect is dealing with the fact that the relative price has changed, so you buy more of that good that is now relatively cheaper. Income effect, buy more of the good when we feel richer. And in the case of the substitution effect, what we're saying is that we're holding the level of utility constant. And it must always be the case. This is an incredibly important part right here. I don't think I can highlight it, but this part here is quite important. It must always be the case that when the good is cheaper, relatively speaking, that you must buy more of it. I was very particular in the words I chose there. Cheaper, relatively speaking. So cheaper relative to the other goods that I could purchase. I will always buy more of it. Now, in the case of the income effect, we're going to see that that's not always going to be the case. Now, in the case of the income effect, rather than holding the level of utility constant, which is what we did for the substitution effect, now I'm going to hold the price of the item constant. And what we see here is that it's going to be different depending on whether they are normal goods or inferior goods. In the case of the normal good, the income effect, I'll buy more of it, right? Because if I feel richer, I certainly will buy more of it. But in the case of the inferior good, whereas the substitution effect is always working in this direction, in the case of the inferior good, I actually buy less of the good when I feel richer. Remember, inferior goods are things like taking the bus or ramen noodles, things that are goods that you only purchase really because of the income levels that you have. And if your income levels were to go up, you would buy less of it, or vice versa. But in the case of the inferior good, you would have remembered that the demand curve was still downward sloping. We didn't draw a different shaped demand curve just because it was an inferior good. And the reason why was because the income effect, although it was working in the opposite direction, was not enough to overcome the very strong substitution effect. So that overall, and that's what this last column here is denoting, is that the demand curve is still downward sloping. Even though in the case of the inferior good, the income effect is slightly overcoming that. Okay, now this is primarily the reason why I made this into a document that we could all look at jointly here. I take a deep breath because it is a little bit complicated here. Let's look at the normal good, where we have the income and substitution effect. Okay, so a lot of things going on here, but let's look at where our normal, our initial budget constraint is this, from R to S. That's our original budget constraint. Okay, this red line right here, U1, is our original indifference curve. So I'm at U1, just touching budget constraint RS, the dark blue line, with my optimal point being A. So that's where I started off. That's where all this begins. And now we're going to lower the price of food, the good on the x-axis. The act of lowering the price of food changes my budget constraint now to RT, so this dashed blue line, making my new indifference curve U2, and my new optimal point B. Now, if we were to draw out the demand curve below this, what we would see is points A and B, right? The ultimate change. Basically what we want to do here in this set of PowerPoints, well, in this PDF document, is break down those changes. Two things going on, the income effect and the substitution effect. So here's what we're trying to do again. A to B, that's the total change that we're seeing from lowering the price of food. The first thing that happens is a substitution effect, caused by, what we're trying to do is hold the level of utility constant. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to draw a new line that's parallel exactly to my new budget constraint, RT. We're going to draw it inward until it just touches the original indifference curve. Why is that? Remember that the substitution effect says we're holding the level of utility constant.